to go ahead and get started with this session here, dialogue and reflection on next steps. At this point, you've heard most of the speakers speaking directly, or they've been organizing the event as well. So I'm going to turn it over. They're going to speak for about 10 minutes each, and we're hoping ideally to have about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end, and then Jim's going to join us for these kind of last sessions that are coming up. So warm welcome to our speakers on this panel.
Okay, I'm starting?
Yes.
Apparently I'm starting. I'm not that organized. I've got some random thoughts here, so hopefully people will be able to follow me. And I don't think I'm going to take 10 minutes either. So just on the questions, just from perspective of the community, so the lessons from Winnipeg. We've been doing this kind of research for a really, really long time in Winnipeg, and particularly in the inner city, but also with some other organizations. And so I feel like we've established, some really long-term trusting relationships, and we're sort of at a place now where organizations will come to us with ideas about research that they feel they would need doing, would like to do, and so that's coming to the Manitoba Research Alliance. And again, we're situated in a run through a community organization, and so I sort of feel, to be honest, a little disconnected from the university, but I'll get to that in a bit. But in the early days, just reflecting back on what it was like when we first started doing this work, and I remember, we already had relationships with people in the community, and I was working in the community, and there was a real reluctance to get involved in community. A lot of the organizations that we worked with in the inner city, and several of those Indigenous organizations, would say, we don't really get why we want to participate in any research. We've been researched to death, and what's it, what good is it? And so there was that real skepticism. So it took us a long time to get to a point where we would have developed together sort of the model of doing research. But we kind of, because we've responded, I think we've kind of gotten past that now. So we don't, I think we've got some, we're doing some good work, interesting work, and I think work that community organizations are finding useful. But with that, I think, has come some really big responsibilities for us that we always need to be mindful of. So we need to be always really respectful of our community partners. We need to always ensure that we're not doing any harm. We need to respect the principles of OCAP, ownership, control, access, possession. That's really important for us, especially since we work with so many Indigenous communities. We also need to be diligent about contributing to the communities that we do research with, and so that means leaving skills behind. So building capacity, hiring local people, making sure that they're trained. That makes things a little bit complicated sometimes, but I think it's really important, and I know that it's really important to our community partners. So those are things that we, continue to learn to do better. And the other thing that's been really important to me is the idea that we don't disappear after the research, so that we continue those partnerships and we're accessible in different ways. And so, having people feel comfortable to pick up the phone and call you as a researcher to contribute something to whatever it is they need, whether it's helping them write an article for the newspaper or whatever that might be. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we've learned to do and are important for those long-term relationships. In terms of the University of Winnipeg, and maybe I'll say, because our partnership at MRA involves the U of M, I don't work at the U of M, but I suppose it's similar there. I think our work in the inner city has definitely raised the profile of community-based research. It hasn't hurt that we've got, these 3 very large Shirk grants to do this research, so that's given us some credibility, the kind of work that we do. We've hired many students, and several faculty in both of those universities have received funding through grants through the Manitoba Research Alliance to do community-based research, so that's certainly given us some credibility with the universities. The universities don't like the fact that we run the grant through CCPA, so that does create a bit of a challenge, but nonetheless, they have many researchers have benefited, so that's been helpful. I I think we still have a lot of work to do, and I've certainly heard a lot of this theme throughout the few days that, we still don't get the respect we deserve with this kind of research. But I guess for me, I don't know, that doesn't really trouble me so much. I think it might be partly because I've come to the university having done the work in the community for many years, and so I don't really concern myself as much about that. I just feel I'm doing the research that I want to do, and that I have the respect of the people in community that I work with, and that's kind of more important to me. That's not to say that I don't understand the challenges of, doing this kind of work and not having credibility and, things, the issues around public or parish, especially for people who don't have tenure. But all that being said, I feel that working at a university as a university professor is, one of the most privileged positions you can have. So, I try not to think too much about all those challenges. There are a lot, people have a lot more challenges than I do in this position. I also think we can seize on some opportunities right now. I mean, there's increasingly pressure on universities to show their relevance to community. And I think we see that in a lot of universities now having these, community engagement offices. Some do things in different ways. I don't think our institution really, is doing a really good job on that as an institution. But nonetheless, universities are seeing that they need to get out there and engage in community, and so we're all doing that already. So I think that will help us all in terms of having more credibility for the work that we do. I think we also need to find more ways to do the publishing in different ways, and so that we can still get publications that we need to, that makes the university happy. But I actually think you can do both, and I think we just need to find new ways of doing those sorts of things. And it does create extra work, but I think it really is satisfying when you can get your publications out through the public realm, not just those sort of, journal articles and books that, maybe nobody else reads except for a few students. We're really lucky at CCPA, or at the MRA, because we have the CCPA where we can disseminate our information out really to a broad base, so that's useful. I just wanted to maybe just say a couple of things. When I was sitting here listening to the panel earlier, I actually, Tracy, I don't have my glasses on, is that Tracy? Yeah. I really appreciated your comments, and I think some of the things that you said, those of us who are university academics could really pay attention to. You said a couple things. One was this idea of treating partners as equals and not you're feeling that sometimes you're treated like a student. And I know what you're saying, because back when I worked in the community and not at a university, I always felt that way, that the university researchers treated me like I was sort of the secretary or something. So I think we really need to be mindful of that, because that's just not appropriate when we're talking about doing this kind of research. So I appreciated that you shared that with us. I also found it troubling that you feel the need to say you have a master's degree. Like, none of us should be throwing around who cares, right? We all have something to bring to the table, and that's unfortunately that you feel you only get feel there's credibility when you share that information. I'm not criticizing for that, I'm just saying that we shouldn't be at that place, because the reality is there's a bunch of people around the table who don't have those degrees. Some don't have, a high school education, and we need to recognize that those of us have those higher levels of education that can be very intimidating for people, so we need to not create an environment where people feel pressured to have some sort of level of education to feel like an equal. So I appreciate you sharing that as well. I'm going to say this, and I don't know if people will appreciate it or not, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think those of us that are academics, and now I've never in the past seen myself as an academic, but I have to now that I work at university. I think we just need to stop being so snooty about ourselves sometimes. I've got a PhD, and do you have a PhD, and what's your PhD in? It's like, it really is not that important. It's more about the work that needs to be done. I'd really like us to see ourselves as members of the community first, rather than academics first, and academics that are coming to, save the community or what, I still think that is out there a little bit, and it might be subtle, but it is still out there. I also really loved your comments that you made about publishing, because I thought I was actually found that quite amusing when you said, you know, I live in a different circle, and I really don't care what you do about your publishing. I need the information to do my work. And I think, again, we have to keep that in mind. There was a gentleman that said something in one of the workshops. Oh, I said I wouldn't go for 10 minutes, and here I am. Said something in one of the workshops I think is also we need to keep in mind. He said, we have to remember that, you know, our one little research project's not going to change the world. And that's the reality, right? There's lots of work to do, and you know, you know, should be all kind of mindful of what everybody brings to the table. I guess that's my time. Sorry, that's a lot.
Hi again. I still love slides, just like I did this morning. So I just want to talk a little bit about how we organize community engaged scholarship at Guelph from the perspective of one particular institute on campus, which is called the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, which I'm going to call CESI for short. I'm also going to tell you that when I first started at Guelph, the acronym was the Institute for Community Engaged Scholarship, which got said ISIS, so we changed it. So that's why we're CESI now. The Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, CESI, is it's a staff-based entity, so it's a unit whose purpose is to provide support for community engaged teaching and research and learning, primarily within our college. And so we are the College of Social and Applied Human Sciences. There are 7 colleges on the university's campus. We do work with other colleges across the university, of course, but the main mandate for CESI is to serve the College of Social and Applied Human Sciences. So that's where that's where I'm focused, but not. That's not to say that there isn't work. There isn't this kind of work going on within other units across campus. And in fact, many people would say that the history of community engagement at Guelph is actually a story about rural revitalization and agricultural extension through the Ontario Agricultural College, which is one of our 7 colleges. So CESI it grounds itself in a commitment to critical community engaged scholarship. And so when we use that language, what we mean is that we have an explicit focus on justice, not just on the public good. We try to make sure that our work focuses on structural issues and not just individual situations. We try to, part of a commitment to critical community engaged scholarship is to produce knowledge that dismantles structures that perpetuate racism and discrimination and so on. But another piece that we're committed to is trying to ensure equitable access to high educational impact experience or high impact educational experiences. So, for example, it can be challenging for students. There's a lot of volunteer work that often gets embedded into community engaged scholarship, and if students can't afford to volunteer because they're working, then they miss out on the opportunities that get provided through this kind of work. So we also think about the justice in our own internal practices, trying to do things like pay students equitably for the time that they contribute to our work together. So this is just a way of thinking about the way that we serve different segments of of what's important to doing community engaged scholarship within a university institutional setting. There's the community, of course, there are students, there are faculty and administrators, and then national and international networks. So as opposed to talking about each of these domains, I just want to give you a brief rundown. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. just a brief rundown of a few of the ways that we actually do this work. So in the area of community engaged learning, which serves faculty, staff, students, and community partners, the primary focus there is that the community engaged learning coordinator, who is a staff member at SESI, helps to broker relationships between community organizations who have short projects that can be undertaken by small groups of students in relatively short periods of time that get built into a curriculum. So, for example, last semester, a group of students in one of my classes did a project looking at, the semester before last, looking at the existence of food policy councils in municipalities and evidence that those food policy councils were resulting in decreases in food insecurity issues, right? So just an environmental scan because one of our local food organizations needed some short-term information, and this built into a course I was teaching about local policies and local policy decision-making. So that's the sort of an example of the community engaged learning piece. The research shop is sometimes faculty members get brought in to participate in that, but it is largely run by project managers who are graduate students and responsive to community partner needs. And these research projects happen outside of faculty research. So those research projects are things that can be held by SESI over time so that we can provide rapid response research on particular questions to particular agencies sort of in short order, because there's a group of essentially research assistants who are paid to work on projects yet to be determined, right? So they're basically a cadre of students that can respond. And then just the last point I'll make, I'll skip the Guelph Lab, which is a partnership with the city, but I can say a little bit more about that. Knowledge mobilization is not about doing new research, it's about figuring out how to move existing knowledge into the hands of people who want it. And then we also try to make scholarly contributions on the practices of community engaged scholarship. So it's like the science of this orientation to research. And the thing that we're working on right now there is in response to a problem with this kind of work that universities have, which is that we can have many different small projects working on similar issues, and there's no real institutional way to build relationships between those projects. And one of the main problems with that, besides the possibility of community burnout, because there's this sort of overemphasis on in trying to engage with the same organization over and over again. But besides that, when we learn something in this project, that information doesn't make it into the next piece of work that's happening. And so we actually keep doing over bits of work that we don't need to do over. And so we're trying to find, we think that that's a university problem, that we have a responsibility to try and do better at being better community partners. And so this is something that we're working on as sort of a contribution to this way of doing research. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to preface my comments on the lessons we've learned at the University of Saskatchewan by identifying two contexts. And the first I could not put better than in a poem by Zoe Roy. Some of you may know Zoe. She's an Indigenous artist, activist, and now academic, working on her master's. And her poem begins, it's a poem called Indigenize. Teaching and learning is at the heart of our community. It gives us opportunity to find the fundamentals, to co-create a space for unity. I mean, usually. But there's a whole society of people cast off as disabled. But we've always been fully capable. So how do we place ourselves to a place where we're able to fulfill this new agenda and build a new circular table, and maybe one that's more inclusive and stable? And my second context is around the university's claims that engagement is a priority, but it's a priority with very few dollars attached. And so those are the two important contexts. And so CUSAR, Community University Institute for Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan, began in the community in the 1990s with community and academic activists working on the Quality of Life Roundtable. So we began in the community, and we remain committed to research that is supportive of a deeper understanding of community issues and ways that we can improve quality of life. So authentic partnerships remain at the heart of who we are, building on trust and respect and mutually beneficial knowledge that is as rigorous as it is practical. And so we do not concede that those two are in opposition. We remain unique at the university in our governance. We are co-governed, and so we have half community members and half faculty members, although I would concede that the university financial requirements mean that I'm in charge of the finances. So as the university co-director, that is my role, but I share all other decision-making powers with my community co-director, who is Bill Holden, a senior City of Saskatoon planner. We learned in the 1990s, it so happened that there was a major conference in Saskatoon hosted by Marie Batiste on the cultural restoration of oppressed Indigenous peoples, and it brought Indigenous peoples from around the world. And Graham and Linda Smith from New Zealand told us that in order to effect change, you have to have multiple strategies in multiple sites. So I know it's an exhausting agenda, but it's true. It's the only way to make change. So we learned that, and we learned from Indigenous scholars and activists. We've had the tribal chief of the Saskatoon Tribal Council on our board. We've had the Urban Aboriginal Strategy. And we learned from them that you have to both participate and challenge. Right? Participate in mainstream institutions, whether it's SHIRT grants or university and so on, and challenge those institutions to do things differently, to bring and to make visible and possible more equitable ways of doing things. And in that process, we have to leverage our resources and mobilize knowledge for healthy, sustainable communities. So it's been the strength of our partnerships and the fact that we are embedded in community. That's been the strength of CUSAR and how we have managed to secure successive SHIRT grants, although that's become increasingly hard in recent times. We have a number of smaller ones. But it also quite literally expanded our horizons when in 2006 we were awarded a SHIRT Cura on the social economy. And up until then we've been pretty well local. And so that pushed us to be provincial, regional, and national, because that was part of what we were. And that caused us to rethink our mandate and to redefine our strategic directions, which are now community sustainability, social economy, rural-urban linkages, because of course we learned very quickly you can't think about one community without understanding the movement back and forward between communities, cross-cultural and Indigenous community development, and of course to keep monitoring community-university partnerships. We've got to keep studying how we do things. And further learning came with 10 plus years of working with the Northern Saskatchewan Trappers Association Cooperative. When after a couple of years of data collection and interviews and focus groups and learning from them to rethink colonial stories about the meaning of trapping, and the graduate students who met regularly with me as PI and the president of the Trappers and the advisory group came up with a draft report that had not a single word of the voices of the Trappers. And what it taught us was how readily colonial narratives reinscribe themselves and push out alternative stories. And so that taught us to rethink how we did things and to extend timelines, to spend way more time on that debriefing processes, and to have an explicit decolonizing methodology. And so we developed what we call our 3 Rs, the research, relationships, and reflexivity, and we have to invest in it. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reminds us, education must remedy the gaps in historical knowledge that perpetuate ignorance and racism. And so this was a reminder of how readily that ignorance can revisit. And so responding to the coercive 3 Rs of colonial education requires this ongoing monitoring in everything we do. And redistributing authority, ensuring intergenerational dialogue, for example, so that all voices are included in the discussion, so the youth are there. Resisting and unpacking academic orthodoxies and monopolies. That's been a big one, to get around those assumptions about disinterest, as the guarantor of research reliability, when in fact it's another name for indifference that breeds injustice. And so understanding that we need the kind of passion that we have, and that it's not something to apologize for. So challenging systems and stereotypes. It's about participating constantly. On the first day, Joanne Lee said, check out the record of where the researchers have been. And so we're on boards, we sit on policy tables, we participate in advocacy groups. We are there always in the community. But we're also recognizing our privileges and trying to put those privileges to work, challenging, creating and recreating new institutions and organizations. So the SPRP that Colleen talked about, that came out of QSAR research and research at the health region. We also established the Engaged Scholar Journal. And if you don't know that journal, we spent 2 years to set that up because it is important to have those legitimate sites where you can exchange knowledge. And so that was worth doing. We're part of the Suffice project and the current efforts to establish a Community Campus Engagement Canada. We need those institutions, places where we can remind ourselves of the importance of what we do. And to continue to hold institutions to account, demanding that they live up to their claims about priorities. And like Colleen saying, so where are the dollars? It's not a priority if the dollars aren't there. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to start, I wanted to correct, in the description of me, it calls me the founding director of the CRU, and I would say it's more like first director, because there were a lot of people that went before me who got the CRU up and running to the point where it could appoint a director and staff. And so I'm going to sort of tell you a little bit about that history, and then Lynn will tell you about what we're working on now and some in the future. I'm going to speak, because I'm very confident in our work, I'm also going to speak of sort of the, not just the promises and the lessons, but also the perils and pitfalls, and so no sugarcoating in my presentation. I'll leave that up to you, Lynn, to do more sugarcoating. It's important to know this history because it was fairly bottom up. It was first proposed as a faculty and community-driven initiative in 2004 and within the Faculty of Arts, and it got its first budget of $5,000 in 2008. So that location in the Faculty of Arts and the origins are important factors, and sometimes often they're points of debate among ourselves and with the wider community. Though we're housed in that faculty, we are sort of a portal for the whole university. But there are also very good portals in the federated colleges, in Luther, Campion, First Nations University, within the business faculty. So there's different points around the university that also do great work in this area. And it's in this world of sort of rationalizing and centralizing, it's often suggested, oh, we should just like consolidate everything in one big office. So that's to me, I think the counter argument would be that it's that would increase bureaucratization and enhance the portfolios of some university executives, but not necessarily bring any additional resources to the unit. And it's definitely out there, and I'd be interested in hearing from community members what they think and their experiences in other universities as well. So it's that idea, is a centralized unit a boon or a bane? I'm a little mindful of Victoria because they centralized and then immediately shut down. So the peril is, the promise is that we've grown, which is great, and then the peril is what comes next as this becomes more popular in the institution without many resources behind it. The bones of our organization, according to our constitution, the mandate is, quote, to provide independent participatory research support in response to needs expressed by communities. So it's a fairly specific kind of research that we do support. The research and action as a result is often controversial by nature. There have been complaints to the university president's office from institutions that feel threatened by the research, including institutions that sometimes have their own high-level partnerships with the university. That's the part of the reality. If you do it right, it unsettles power. And that's the whole purpose of this kind of research, is unsettling and decolonizing the powers of the academy and the way we do things. So far, the university has stood beside us, and the community has stood beside us when we needed it. We're proud that on paper and our constitution, our board is also half community members, although I often wonder, in the world of power dynamics, is 50% really enough to tip balance of power towards community? Probably not. It probably should be more a majority. So these are the questions that arise. You know, how do you unsettle power from within? And this whole discourse now, I mean, community engagement is part of our strategic plan for the whole university. Does that take some of the teeth out of what, you know, some of us understand as action research, which is much more focused on social justice and political action? The good side is great community support. We've got lots of community involvement. And the peril that is, you know, that idea of institutional co-optation and institutional controls that are already embedded in it, including the power of, you know, the dean's office to ultimately, if they wanted to, overrule what we do. The work that we do, I'll leave Lynn to mostly go over that, we do linking, we do learning projects and a lot of capacity building out there in the community. Since 2008, we've had 50 community partners. And this includes both formal NGOs, but you don't have to be a formal NGO, you don't have to have a nonprofit number or an office or staff. We also work with ad hoc action community groups. And we generally have about a half dozen projects going concurrently. Resources, we've got one staff person. We've got a little office on the 4th floor of the classroom building. Annual operating budget of $6,000. And then we get $12,000 annually for our Research and Action Fund, which allows us to grant 4 grants of $3,000 each, roughly, for community small projects. And there's a whole story of how we managed to get that fund going and the arguments we had to make. make, because it's very reverse of how universities operate with funding, what we set up, but maybe if people are interested, they could ask about that in the question period. Our source is the Dean's discretionary budget for that, so that means it's discretionary. You know, we don't have a lot of guaranteed stability. We've been lucky so far. We also get support from students through our perk and through volunteers, and of course through our community partners, both in kind, and also cash support for events. And I would really draw your attention to the last page here. This has our great community supporters, for whom we are so grateful for things like this. Is that fair? We accomplish a lot with a little, which is the good thing. The question that raises is, why is this type of research still so marginally supported on our university, and as I'm hearing from other universities? So can we keep up with the growing need? Because now the tri-councils are all wanting to fund this kind of research, so more people are approaching us, and how do we keep up? I worked on a study in 2014, a survey of faculty as part of a national research project. And at that time, and I'd love to do a follow-up, respondents, I won't go into the details of what we learned, but basically there is a good practice of action research, community research here, but people did not generally feel supported by community leaders. By university leaders. I'll just sort of, if you want more information about that, just let me know about that study. So all of this leads to, you know, the larger questions for us to tussle with when it comes to institutional support in a neoliberal university. How do we get that express support that we hear so much about, from platitudes to action, and basically what's to be done? And the good news is we're still standing. So the lesson is, where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, hi everybody. I think if I haven't met you personally, I've probably gone back and forth through emails with you at some point in time. So I'm Lynn Gidluck, and the one kind of paid staff at the CRU. When people ask me what my job is, I usually tell them, some of you have already heard this story, I'm kind of like eHarmony. So, and in the eHarmony world, you're trying to find the perfect matches, right? And so if a member of the community comes up to me, and it's my job to try to, with an issue or a problem, to try to find the team at the university that may be able to help them. And then once we kind of get past the finding the match, kind of acting as that relationship coach, right? Because we are two different worlds. I don't really consider myself part of a university person. I consider myself a community member first. And so when people from the community come to me, like my new friend that I just met during the break, Rashid, from the Saskatchewan College of Paramedics. You know, we had a really lovely conversation during the break. He's doing some fabulous work, putting together a potential grant to, one of these big bodies that gives money. Anyways, they've done all the work. They've got the problem identified and everything. And my message to him was, this is a fabulous opportunity for the right person at the university. And you don't just have to accept anybody at the university here. You guys know what you're doing, what you want to research. I will introduce you to a few people. It's your decision whether you work with them or not. This has to be, first and foremost, beneficial to you as the community. So that's the message that I give when people come and will talk to me. And we've heard throughout this whole last 3 days that the key to everything is communication and relationship building. So the first step is really just calling our office. If sitting down, we have a conversation, and I can't tell you the number of times where we've just been able to have brilliant brainstorming sessions that go in all different little kind of ways that can turn out to be quite nice. But we've heard a few times about the issue of not having enough resources. We were very deliberate in kind of asking our provost to come and to meet and open the conference. And also in terms of having the president have a message in our program, because we're trying to get them to put their money where their mouths are. So our official motto is like, as one who serves. The university's, one of the strategic pillars is community, but as everybody has said, we're not really resourcing this in the way that we need. And just what makes me really, really happy is that we have so many people from really diverse communities that have come together for the last 3 days. And that is a big, strong demonstration to the people within this ivory tower world that we live in, that this is what the community wants. So this is my challenge to you guys, is that please try to get that message to these people, that this is what you want, we want more of this kind of stuff, and we hope that this is the direction you're going to continue to be in, because people like Trish and Michelle and others that are doing community-based research, I think they kind of feel a little bit like they're broken records after a while, like they're knocking their heads against the walls. We need the community support to kind of go use your networks, your connections, to tell these people that this stuff needs to be funded, and way to go. Thank you for this summer. If you had a good time, I hope you all did this last 3 days. If you did, don't tell us, but tell the people that have the purse strings, so that we can continue to grow. And I'm just going to end by kind of on a real positive note in that Nancy and Cindy, can you guys, is Nancy here and Cindy? Okay. Nancy and Cindy are teaching a graduate course associated with these last 3 days. Are some of your students in the classroom here? Some of them waving? There's a whole pile of undergraduate students here. Can anybody who's an undergraduate student? We had a whole pile of undergraduate students that were funded by the Regina Public Interest Research Group. I'm really, really, really excited about that, because as Tracy was saying in the panel, her comments before, it's, we need to introduce this type of research early in your careers. You're going to be the ones that are doing this kind of work, and come talk to me. There's lots of opportunities to do research and get connected with community organizations, because we need to just start having those conversations. And so I'm very excited that all the students are here. And community organizations, thank you very much for coming. This is the first step for us. We're going to be sending out a post-conference survey. Please fill it out and tell us how we can do better in the future.
So we're going to open it up to the audience now, despite my alarm going off every couple of minutes. We're actually ahead of schedule, so we have 15 minutes for questions, which is great. I believe, right? Go to 1:30. Yay, go team. So, questions? Yes, boom, right there.
Does the CRU have a mechanism on a webpage where community organizations who are looking to have a competitive process where researchers apply to lead research in community? I'm sure you don't, but that would be awesome. If there was a way that community could post things where they're looking for researchers and what kind of qualifications and experiences and methodologies they're looking for expertise in, and switch the recruiting around where community is actively recruiting, and that there's a vetting process for agencies. And I know the trans community out of Toronto did this back in, probably a decade ago, starting the Trans Pulse Project, which you can look that up. It's a national transgender community-based research project led by trans people, and they interviewed researchers and then they picked one. So communities can do that too.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We did look some years back into the idea of a research shop. It kind of somehow morphed over to external affairs at the university.
Because it was brilliant.
And yeah, they sort of, I don't think counties are going. they kind of took it over and then it went nowhere.
Right.
Basically, but I know we've certainly heard that type of suggestion of something web-based. It does take a lot of hours to set up, but it's certainly something we could keep on our radars.
Great
Something
student,
that-
great summer job for a student.
Yes, it is. So we need to find some summer job funding for that, because the challenge always becomes how you keep it up and sustain it. To me, that would be with the university permanently funding it. But we've heard that. Thank you.
Or regular meetings would be the other option, I would think, so that there's more face-to-face relationships. Yeah.
Cindy?
I think there's, Trish mentioned several institutes on campus at the University of Regina that have research, community-based research capacity and programs and projects. And one is also out of the Faculty of Education, Instiitute, and there's actually money there. And I really encourage students in education to actively, it's being recreated, reimagined, so to actively advocate and speak up for community-based research being a direction that the faculty goes in or something.
What was that acronym again, sorry?
Sorry?
The acronym.
The acronym right now is CIDRU, but it's going to be changing, so there's only one research institute within that. I also want to, I think it's important that Lynn Gidluck also gets. So you thanked everybody else, but I think you need to thank you.
I have lots of questions, so I'll keep them to myself, other people should ask questions.
Same here.
Okay, then I'll ask a question.
Too many waffles.
I know when we went through strategic planning on campus, the CRU had to be actively involved in being in conversations around the language of the strat plan. You know, we talked about this already a little bit around co-opting language. People could see on the horizon that SHRC and CIHR were going to be incentivizing financially, and campuses got ahead of that. So there's kind of a fine line though, right, between trying to actively be involved in those conversations and ask for ethical practices and not parasitic practices and policing what constitutes community-based or participatory action research or community-driven research. And so I'm just wondering how you've navigated that over the years, especially for our colleagues that are visiting from other campuses, because I sort of know what the CRU's been doing for a little while, and mostly it has been that, being like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing there? We're going to have a meeting. Can we open up that language a little bit? But I'm just wondering for the other campuses what that's looked like on and off campus for that, you know, to that degree as well for folks from CCPA as well, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and maybe, you know, a couple of thoughts. One interesting thing maybe is that this adoption of the term critical community engaged scholarship, that's new. So that's something that I think many of us who have long been trying to do this work have sort of held, but it took us until this year to write it into the strategic plan to sort of say, we're about structural change. And so some of it is about sort of giving people fair warning in that way, you know, that these are the kinds of values and practices that we uphold. Another piece I think about sort of navigating this relationship, and then that helps, for example, with decision-making processes, right? About what kinds of work we do and don't, or the Institute does and doesn't get engaged with. And then probably the other thing is that part of the reason why SESI both has sort of an inward-facing focus, so supporting the university, and an outward-facing focus, thinking about what's sort of respectful and appropriate with community, is precisely to try and navigate this, to do the educational work within the institution to say, you know, so to try and prevent people, for example, like many examples of this, somebody will come, they're putting together an application for funding, they read that they need to include a section about knowledge mobilization, and at the last minute they call Ceci and they say, you know, what I need to do knowledge mobilization, like what are some things that people do, right? So there's zero chance that this has been kind of meaningfully built in, like what do partners really, so some of that kind of stuff. So those are incomplete, but examples.
I too don't have all the answers, but I'd go back to our early learning of being, you know, multiple strategies and multiple sites and both participating and challenging. And I would say both within the institution and outside. And so Bill and I sit at the Centres Forum, which is chaired by the Vice President Research, and all the directors of centres sit there, and so we address these issues all the time. And so we do participate and we do challenge and we remain consistent about what matters to us and keep challenging them on the language they're using, the language of discovery, for example. And I go, are we still doing, you know, we discovered everything, you know, the doctrine of discovery, don't you remember what that meant? And so, yeah. So we do that, we do the challenging. We also do the institution building that I think is important because we recognize you must have these multiple sites, these multiple places of legitimacy and legitimizing both community voices, because this is a journal that's for all of us. It's about engaged scholarship done by community and academics together. And so, you know, it's just constantly doing those things. And you know, Lynn was saying, community, you know, speak up about why this matters. And so the fact that we are in the community constantly, it's a constant reminder of, you know, how quickly things can be co-opted and go sideways. And so we just keep working at it.
So it's different for us because we operate outside of the university, but we have a process on our committee. We have a research committee that vets proposals that comes to us, and on that committee are academics, university academics, community researchers, but also we have a number of community organizations that we pay an annual stipend to sit on that committee. So the process is really, we don't ask for huge proposals. We try to get people to send us very concise proposals with a budget attached. But the things that we look for in a proposal are, how is the community involved to ensure that there's a legitimate community partner? Where did the idea come from? So we want to see proposals talk about why they're doing the research, where the idea came from, so that we can see that it's come from community. It's not just a researcher's idea. We look at who are they hiring. We have funds available for community researchers, so as well as students, so we encourage local hiring and training. We look at how are people being hired and trained. We really encourage, especially hiring and training Indigenous people, because so many of the projects that we fund are working with Indigenous communities. So we don't. Again, because we're not bogged down in some of that bureaucratic stuff that others are dealing with, you know, it's a little bit of an easier process. But I mean, I have to say, the challenge of it is that you become marginalized a little bit from the university, right? Because they don't like that. They're not getting a piece of the pie because they're not getting any of the administrative dollars that comes with SSHRC grants, right? So that is the other challenge. So, but I guess we have just an easier process, and we're able to. We don't really have to deal so much with, you know, the idea of CDR being co-opted, because we've got our model that we vet all the proposals.
Last words to Trish or Lynn? We're at time almost. I'm fine. Last words to you, you're holding the mic. Or last words from someone in the audience, we have about 2 minutes.
I have a
Yep,
question.
go ahead.
So actually, we have 3 models here that we need to evaluate. One is your model, Shauna, and then we have 3 community university centers, right? We also have Jim's model of a standalone department committed to doing this kind of work, and he gets line funded, right? He gets
Jim's
part-
actually part of my model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Shauna, so then we actually have only 2 models, which is the departmental model and the university center models, right? I'm just trying to say that.
I'll let Jim clarify, I'm not sure what you're.
So what I'm trying to say is perhaps centers are constituted to do exactly what the university needs them to do. That is to perform, that they are doing community engaged scholarship. It's a performative model. I don't know if you know what I mean. You're doing the work of the university but not getting the funding, and it allows the university to pretend or to act as though
Yes.
it's actually doing the
It's
work.
lip service is what you're saying. Yeah.
But there's another model which is actually some combination. I mean, you've got a department, and this model, which is a departmental model, is about teaching and learning. Everything that we do, critical teaching and learning and research, right? I'm just thinking, there has to be another way to get the resources. And perhaps we should look at transforming centers into university departments. You know, it would be a big uphill struggle to do that, because the university probably does not want to create any more units, departmental units. But if we really wanted to institutionalize and decolonize and actually make the university do what it's supposed to do, which is to serve us, now I'm in the community. Yeah, I don't like that kind of thing. I think of us, I think of me as part of a membrane, and my job as who I am in the university is to make the university boundaries spongier. Anyways, I just want to put it out there as we could actually think about actually having an alternative 3rd model.
And maybe it involves community agencies and individuals joining as members and paying a moderate membership fee to provide a little bit of sustainable something as a contribution. I'm just putting that out there. You of course have to offer something in return for membership, but that kind of model, which would be reinforced from the local and provincial community depending on the scope of the work. But right now, community is the piece that doesn't have a formal place in any of these models, from what I'm hearing.
Well, can I just respond to this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, that remains an institutional model.
So I can only speak for the model that I am familiar with, which is the model that we have in Manitoba. And so I'm not really sure, because Jim is part of the MRA and I work in the department, so we're sort of doing the same work, so I'm not sure.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure what you were talking about, but I'm going to go back to the CCPA as basically the model, because I actually think what we need to be doing more is allowing community-based organizations to get the big grants, because that is how, I mean, you know, the challenge of decolonizing big university institutions, I mean, everybody's paying that lip service, but, you know, let's face it, that's, you know, we're a long way from there. Not to disrespect the work that you guys are doing and the models that you have, but it, you know, if you pull some of this out and allow community organizations to work with universities, but it's run from the community, that gives the community a lot more equally participating in doing the research and getting the grants and controlling the money that we're doing research with. So I know that's a bit of a challenge for people working in universities. Maybe, I don't know, people like the idea or not, but I think that's actually, very few community-based organizations are able to access SSHRC grants because they have to go through this huge process of getting institutional eligibility and all that. But we do have, it does happen. So
And most community agencies are administering federal dollars, which makes them eligible to administer federal research dollars. There is a process you need to go through, but most agencies are already adhering to the same federal money management practices. So All Nations Hope, as I said, we hold CIHR research dollars. We were ranked #1 in the Indigenous Research Review for the last project grant competition. We wrote the grant.
Right. Good, so that's a good place to land, because we're
So,
at time.
yeah.
Thank you very much.